Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Terry, and I work in TDR as the Manager of Research Policy. And today, in this short presentation, we're going to be talking about communication after your publication, what I would call the knowledge management to influence behavior and policy. So I think it's worth just reminding ourselves of the theory of change of Sorted, what Sortit's trying to do. And actually, we start in a very good place for uptake because we have engagement of the stakeholders right at the very beginning, and they're involved in defining research priorities. And that means hopefully when the research is undertaken and their findings are then communicated back to them, they are primed to receive that information and perhaps make the change that's necessary. We support you in conducting and publishing your operational research and building the research capacity that will enable that to happen. And then in more recent years, what we've added to that are the mechanisms for communication and advocacy to ensure that the evidence that's being created, the knowledge that's being made, is able to be shared and used by others. If I add the modules of Sorted onto that, you can see them here. So module one is the protocol development. That's how we actually write up the research priority with a scientific method and our approach. In module two, we look at the data that you have access to and the tools that you can use to analyze those data. And then module three, where we are now, is having done the work that you've done, how do we turn that into a scientific manuscript, write that up and get that published so that it has that credibility of a quality piece of work. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really what happens between module three and module four. And module four is more about communication, advocacy, and uptake, and the different approaches that we need to take to ensure that the evidence that we've published in our manuscript is able to be understood and used by others. So if we look at this diagram, we can see that there's actually slightly two different frameworks at play here. In the modules 1 to 3, I'd say it's very much within the research framework. And within the research framework, you build your case towards a conclusion. Your conclusion is at the end of the manuscript. And you're very careful to use recognized scientific methodology, scientific language, and all of this builds credibility for the work that you've undertaken. People will understand that it's a very well respected method that's being used. You cover all your bases. You provide the limitations and the caveats. So maybe there was some data missing from your study, and you explain in detail what you did so that your peers, other researchers, could undertake this work if they chose to do so, and therefore you provide them with all the information, all the data, and you present the work in a very objective and unbiased way. However, when it comes to communication and advocacy, something that we're going to be covering in module 4, we turn that on its head. And in actual fact, you actually have your headline first. This research showed that we need to change our diagnostic procedure in our laboratories, for example. And that's important because that will control antimicrobial resistance in a certain way. And then you can fill in with the background afterwards as you need to. We tend to strip out any jargon, any acronyms, because these can often confuse the non-expert reader. And we tend to limit the message to the headline. This is what is important, and this is why it's important, and this is the change that's needed to be made. And you keep those messages simple so that anybody who's a non-expert could understand the rationale, understand what needs to be done. Now, I keep using the word simple, but that doesn't mean to say it's easy or straightforward, and quite a lot of preparation is needed. And often that's needed to seize opportunities which arise. Perhaps you run into somebody, maybe your boss's boss, who asks you a question, and you can then use the material you've got in your head to present very quickly and precisely what it is that you've been doing, why it's important, and what needs to be done. And finally, what we do when we communicate and advocate is, yes, we always have the factual basis of what we did, but we always need to combine that with a sort of an emotional argument, if I may, something that says, why is this important? Why does this matter? How many lives do we think we'll save? And so, as you can see, there is a slight shift in emphasis between what we're doing as researchers and what we need to do as communicators and advocates. So what does that mean? Well, have a think yourself. What is the information and in what format does it come to you? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you discuss with colleagues that makes you change your mind or your behavior? And if you imagine that is normal for you, then you can identify other people will be similar in that sense. And what we say is the starting point for all good communications is know your audience and map them out. These are the stakeholders and try to identify what information will change their behavior. So when we talk about stakeholders, what do we mean? We mean your colleagues, the program managers, the policy people, the decision makers, the financiers, other health workers or other vets or environmentalists, patients groups, the media, the public. Therefore, a lot of them will be outside what you'll be talking about. Well, may well be outside their what they normally understand, and so you need to be clear for non-experts. And so there are many, many different ways to reach them. But you do always need to think about using plain language. Perhaps there needs to be translation for local language, the use of infographics to get across a complicated message quickly, visuals, different ways of presenting data, ways that you wouldn't perhaps use in a manuscript, different ways of presenting, and the use of media, particularly social media these days. There may well be a technical document, and we will definitely be supporting you producing a written brief. It may have policy implications, or it may just have some technical changes that needs to happen. It really depends on what your research uh, uncovers. And there'll always be options about the degree of change that needs to happen and what are the positive or the negative implications of making those changes. And the result of all this, well, what we want to achieve is that if there is a change in policy or behavior, that it's evidence informed. The evidence has informed that change. And that is context plus time, the time to make the change, the impact on the workforce, finance, all of those things. But what we really want to see in the end is an impact. Has this mediated antimicrobial resistance? Had this improved our coverage within our patient groups or other things? So just very quickly, what Module 4 will then cover is we'll support you in the creation of a knowledge management plan, and that will have a number of elements. The first one, as I've said, will be how to do a stakeholder mapping, and we're going to start that process now in Module 3. We'll support you in how you write a plain language handout that will communicate your findings, advocate for change, show the positive and perhaps negative implications of different options, and what are those implications with respect to the amount of money that may have to be spent or might be saved, the time that will be invested, the impact on the workforce, but always leading towards this is the benefit, this is what we hope to achieve. We'll also give you support in creating a PowerPoint and give you opportunity to actually present and practice that PowerPoint, which is very good, and different ways of presenting data to make your data stand out and make it visually easier to understand. And finally, as I said, you may only have a very short window of opportunity to create an impact or make a presentation to somebody. And so we'll give you the opportunity to draft, learn, and then deliver an elevator pitch, meaning a short talk, perhaps less than 30 seconds. Sometimes when you just run into somebody who's very interested in what you're doing, and you can say, well, I did this, and this is the impact it will have. These are the changes that we need to make. So preparing for Module 4, one of the things we want you to do now and start thinking about now is stakeholder mapping. So the first thing is generate a list of everyone who might have a stake in your findings. Who's going to have an interest? And who are they that will help? Who do you think is going to be positive and work on your behalf and maybe advocate for you? But just as important, who do you think will hinder your work and who perhaps will work against what you're trying to do? And in a way, thinking about this, it's trying to decide what level of power and influence do they have in the situation that you're working. Are they a key decision maker? and what level of interest do they have in the subject. They might well work in the finance department and therefore not have a particularly strong interest in the day-to-day runnings of a veterinary practice or the environmental activities that you're undertaking, but they will definitely have a strong interest in maintaining their budgets. And so, how do people like to receive information? Can you try to work out whether somebody prefers to be um, dealt with one to one, or receive a memo, or have a visual presentation? So, we need to think about all these things. And what we would like you to do is spend a few moments during Module 3, or maybe just after, and look at the matrix that I'm going to show you in the next slide, and then complete the stakeholder template with the examples in your context. So what you need to do is focus on the key players, the key influencers, and those who have a key interest in what you're doing. And if you can complete that draft stakeholder map before Module 4, then we'll be in a good place when we get into that communications and advocacy module. So here is a one tool just for thinking about people in terms of how they relate to your particular area and your project. It's about their level of interest, their level of power, and their level of influence. So on the bottom scale, the level of interest of a stakeholder increases as it goes to the right, and on the left-hand scale, their power and influence increases as it goes up. So what we find is that in the top right-hand corner, we have the key players. They are very interested and they have a lot of power, and they often are the decision makers, the people that will really decide whether any change is going to happen. And so they are obviously a very key focus for our communications. We need to consult with them, we need to engage with them. And in this case, we've often engaged with them early on. They were involved in looking at the protocols as they were being developed, and we need to manage that relationship. However, there are two other key groups to think about. There are key influencers, and those that may not necessarily have a strong interest in AMR, but they have a strong uh, um, control or influence over the work that you're trying to do. Examples may well be people, as I said, within the finance section. So if you're suggesting a change, how much is it going to cost? Is there a cost benefit to making those changes? So they also need to be engaged with, consult. Will there be a barrier to the change? And what you aim to do with that engagement is see if you can actually convince them that this is an important area, it is interesting, and they do need to feel that level of interest as to why a change would be very important. The other key group in the bottom right, in the yellow there, are key interest groups. Now, these often are not decision makers. They have very limited influence over how things get done, but they have a very strong and vested interest, and those are often things like patient groups. They want to see the best care that they can get. They want to feel safe, but also they may not want their out-of-pocket expenses to increase. So it's going to be a tricky one to decide where they fall within the work that you're trying to do. But definitely a group that can be engaged and consulted. If you can get them on your side, they can be extremely strong in terms of measuring support for the change that needs to happen, but also lobbying for change. The final group, they're called not key, but that doesn't really mean they're not important. And that's the wider public, maybe the non-health workforce, people not interested in AMR yet. And so those can be targeted with general material, with newsletters, with websites. And again, the aim really is to increase their interest and to increase why does this matter to them? Why should this matter to them? So that may help you in understanding where to place your stakeholders in your stakeholder map. And then the stakeholder map uh, actually looks like this, a very simple table in a way. And this is a template, and we would like you to try and complete this before module 4. Now, the first thing to bear in mind is this is for your eyes only. So you can write your own comments. You can say this person is a real stickler, or they never answer my emails, or they're not interested in speaking to somebody at my level, those kind of comments. But what you do use this for is it's a living document in the sense, and it really sets out your strategy for who you are going to speak to and how you're going to speak to them. So in our example, and this is only an example, we look at perhaps the impact of decentralized procurement on the consumption of antibiotics per daily dose. Now, just beware, this example may not match your context, but it's just to give you a sense. So if we looked at, say, the first column, we put down what type of stakeholder are they? In this case, a hospital pharmacist. We put in their contact details. Now that might be email, Twitter account, other ways of contacting them. And then the first thing you want to do is imagine from their perspective how the findings that you are coming to, and you'll be beginning to work those through as you come to the end of module 3, is the change, if you are suggesting a change, is it going to impact their work? And is it going to have a high, low, or medium impact? Now, that could be a very positive or a very negative outcome because they could like what you're saying or not like what you're saying. And so you need to know where their influence and power is. Are they a decision maker or are they an advisor to a decision maker? So their power might be low, but their influence could be quite high. And imagine again what is important to them. So a hospital pharmacist, they're going to want to control the costs within their purchasing, but they also want to maintain stocks and they want to be able to respond well when clinicians ask them for particular types of medicine. So they're going to have a range of different needs, a range of different perhaps conflicting needs. So thinking about that in a positive way, what will help them understand what you've done and contribute to your work and maybe even promote and support it. So again, it's communicating with them, understanding their position, finding out what support they can give to any changes. On the flip side of that, of course, if you are making their lives slightly harder, increasing costs, introducing new workflows which may make their days longer, then they may have a slight resistance to that. And so at the end, in the end column, you think about, well, okay, what are the different strategies I need to employ to ensure that I've engaged with them, that they're not surprised by any change that's coming, that they actually support the change, and they may well sign up to that kind of change. Another example may be a journalist. Now, I think it's unlikely for many of you that you're going to be having a sort of journalistic story out of your research. But as an example, it's a good one where the journalists have very low power to make any decisions or change anything, but they have a very strong influencing power if they present your work well, because they mediate your message and it's read by others, particularly say politicians or policymakers, who may be very sensitive to what's being said in the media. But of course, what's important to them? Getting a story. And that could be a very positive thing because you have wide dissemination and it has this influencing factor. But it can be risky, of course, because they may misrepresent what you're saying or change it in such a way to make a political point, and therefore you end up discrediting your findings. So um, strategy, particularly with journalists, is really, if you don't have some personal experiences, then talk to a communications expert and get that kind of advice. And then the final example is patient groups, which we've heard before. Often they have very low power, but they might have a strong influence or good influence if they're a good advocacy group. And so they could be very good to get on side, particularly if you're seeking to influence at the political level. So those are examples. As I said, they may not be appropriate in your context. What you have in the resources section is a blank template. And what you need to be able to do is start to, first of all, list all the stakeholders that are important to you. Again, think about this particular matrix, which are the key players, the key influencers, and the key interests that you need to focus on. And then fill in this template as we go. So I hope that's useful. Quick recap before module 4. So think about your project. Who are the stakeholders? Spend a few moments with the power versus interest matrix. Complete the stakeholder template if you can, and discuss that now with your mentors as you're starting to reach the conclusions of your research. This is a good time now to start thinking already about who are the key players if I am suggesting a change that will need to approve such a change. Who influences them? Who has a key interest in that change? And if you can try to do that before module 4, that'll be excellent. There are a couple of very straightforward resources that may help you in this. One is around context mapping, and that gives you a little bit more background to stakeholders and analysis and understanding the positive and negative influences on change. And then the second document is something around how to plan and write and communicate an effective policy brief. Not everything is going to change policy, but when we say policy here, it may mean changing behavior. It's a very simple document, but I like it because it gets the main points across very easily. So as I said, I'm Rob Terry. That's my email. Please email me anytime if you have any queries or suggestions. I'm in Geneva, so I'm available in Geneva time for any online discussion. If you want, let's set up an appointment. We can either do that through the Sorted platform, and we need to book a room and a time, and I'm happy to speak to you, or we can do it via Zoom or any other of the discussion platforms that you use yourself. So as I said, I hope that's really useful, and I look forward to seeing you again when we meet up in Module 4. So yeah, I wish you well in Module 3, and I wish you well in getting your manuscripts written up, submitted, and hopefully published. Thank you.